Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the Biopharm Cell Tech and tech soil negotiations. To be sure, if you have not yet gone to class on Monday evening and you're trying to watch this ahead of time, this is the wrong time to watch it. These are debriefs during which we'll talk about best practices during the negotiations and more generally strategies to be effective with negotiation. So as you can see from my quote title of this presentation, negotiation for resources and to be influential. As a manager, as the owner of a business, in terms of leading a team, you need to be influential. And one way to do that is through negotiation with others. In addition, people often think of negotiation as a way to solve conflict, which is also absolutely the case. We'll get more into when you're negotiating and when to recognize how to use these strategies in just a few moments. More generally, I should let you know that this tape, I get very excited about this actual topic, and I'm not sure how long I'll talk, but my guess is it's going to be over an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, so just to prepare yourself for that. So in terms of talking for the next hour and 15 minutes, I'm going to be discussing the art and science of negotiation. Arguably, it is an art, but we know now we have a really strong body of studies on negotiation which can help people to be more effective. And as I'll talk to you about very shortly, people very often aren't as good as they think they are when they are negotiating. So the 6 topics that we'll discuss are to recognize when you're in a negotiation. So that's the first part. You have to be aware of what kinds of situations are relevant for negotiation, realizing common pitfalls of negotiation, identifying what kind you're in. And we'll talk about that more, but to explain now, there are 2 types, distributive and integrative, and biopharm and tech soil fall into one of those 2 categories, which is the reason why I chose them for you for Monday night's negotiations. Number 4 is to practice distributive, or what's called claiming value negotiation tactics, and having a recognition of those types of concepts. To be sure, any negotiation has a component in which there's a certain set of resources available that represent value, and you are going to be among either 2 people or more who are trying to claim some of that value for your own. So you will be discussing what are some of the concepts that are relevant for you in understanding that and being able to claim value that's commensurate with what you think you should have. 5th is to leverage integrative negotiation tactics and concepts. Integrative, in other words, creating value, is when you can sometimes make what seems to be a certain set level of value actually bigger or stronger. And I'll give you more details on that shortly. And then distinguish behaviors that make someone truly successful in negotiation. The reading that I had you do, one of them, the behaviors of successful negotiators, gets to the very heart of that. And I hope you've had a chance to read it and read it even before you embarked on your negotiations, because there are some really, really interesting ideas in there, and it can help you really think about, okay, well, how good am I? How might I be actually better in negotiating from a practical perspective? So in terms of, number 1, in terms of recognizing when you're in a negotiation, we negotiate much more than we actually think we do. Usually when I probe people about, okay, well, when have you negotiated? People talk about, well, I've negotiated for cars, for homes, for salary/compensation, but we negotiate a lot more than we actually think we do. So as one example, I put on the upper right-hand portion of your screen, do I go out to dinner versus go to the movies with my significant other? If you may want to go to the movies and your significant other wants to go to dinner, that's technically a negotiation in terms of solving that issue because your goals are seemingly opposed at that point in time. I also put on the bottom right a woman that looks unhappy and she's dealing with customer service. So in this particular case, it's a dispute between her and customer service, a larger organization, and in which their goals seem to be lacking alignment. And so the question is, how do you deal with those types of situations? On the left-hand side of the screen are 2 definitions of negotiation. Some people have posited that it's a key communication and influence tool inside and outside an organization. So the focus here, I would say, is on the way you communicate and influence. The argument is anytime you can't achieve your objectives without the cooperation of others, you're negotiating. So, for example, if you are on a project team charged with developing a new product, and the team comes together, and there are a certain number of roles that are designated to be played, and you want one and somebody else wants another, that's a negotiation. Or even just figuring out who should have what role is a negotiation. We negotiate personalities when we interact every day in trying to achieve our goals. Another one definition is negotiation is a process by which two or more parties attempt to resolve their opposing interests or goals. That one, I think, is much more to the heart of what people think about when they think about negotiation. But I would really encourage you to think broadly going forward about when you're negotiating. Anytime you're in a dispute, anytime you have to influence someone to solve a problem in which you have a solution and you're trying to influence them, and there are competing alternatives in front of you, negotiation is a tool for you to become more persuasive and affect the changes that you want. Now, I put on here, most people aren't good negotiators. I rarely use cartoons in discussions, but I liked this one. The mediator sensed that the negotiations were in trouble because people just fell apart and were making faces at each other. We know that there are common pitfalls associated with negotiation, and these 5 are common pitfalls that people succumb to and thus make them less effective in negotiating than they would otherwise like to be. So, for example, viewing negotiations as a battle. If for you the term negotiation evokes some sort of battle cry where you see somebody as a competitor and your goal is to just win as much as possible, that can be a big common pitfall for you, or a big pitfall, because you may lack the ability to extract more value out of it in a negotiation than you would be otherwise. To give you an example, I didn't do it in our class, but I often, in many classes, run an exercise that's called the ugly orange exercise. I think I might have even mentioned this to the class earlier, in which 2 researchers are vying for ugly oranges, 3,000 ugly oranges. Each researcher needs the 3,000 ugly oranges to prevent some major catastrophe from happening. For example, some sort of virus to be unleashed on the West Coast that will harm a significant number of people, and to prevent the harm to babies as another population. So both researchers really want these oranges. And if the researchers come together and the mindset of one of them or both of them is that negotiations are a battle and it's really all about winning as many oranges as can be had, they often miss that one researcher needs the peel of the oranges and the other needs the juice. So the reality is that both parties can substantially win, but they don't recognize that because they come in with this sense of seeing the second picture that I put on there of 2 people, rubbing arms and trying to win the battle. And in addition, if you look on the right-hand side here, do you view negotiations this way? As 2 people dreadfully angry at each other, or this way, as ultimately you will come together to solve the problem. That's the left-hand side of the screen. So your mindset can be a common pitfall. Second is this notion of leaving money on the table. We know that even though a lot of people say that they can extract all the value out of a negotiation that exists, they often cannot. And so when there's more money to be extracted from a negotiation and people aren't able to secure that, it's a lose for both parties. Settling for too little. If you've ever had this happen where, say, you decide you want to sell your bike for $200, and somebody comes in and says, okay, well, I'll give you $250 for it. The $250 has already exceeded your $200 target. So you say, great, I'll take it. And then you leave later only to wonder, what would that person have actually paid? You took $250. How much more would they have actually taken? So settling for too little often happens. That's called a winner's curse. Walking away from the table, hubris, sometimes people's emotions and egos get in the way, and they actually walk away from a deal that is better than any of their alternatives. Or lastly, settling for terms that are worse than their current situation. It's called an agreement bias, wherein when we often negotiate, we really want to make it happen. So we find